Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L and hey, welcome to the first light novel review on the channel, this time featuring Sword Art Online Volume 9. So how we're going to structure this, I'm just going to give you some basic data at the very beginning. From there we're going to move into a general breakdown of the chapters in the book, and just so you have an idea of how the story flowed from chapter to chapter. We will then talk about the themes introduced in the book and how it executed. We'll talk about the characters and some mechanics that were going on in the book, if any, and talk about how those executed and how well those worked, and then I will rant about a certain character who has a certain annoying qualities, who is just sometimes you love him or you hate him, and we're gonna talk about him and have a fun time. And while you're listening to the video, there will be illustrations from the light novel itself passing by, and there will also be video clips from the past Sword Art Online series where appropriate. If you get the itch to buy this light novel, clicking on that link and using that link to go to Amazon will help the channel at no extra cost to you. You just have to point it out just because I can't be fooling people. But anyway, Sword Art Online Volume 9, officially subtitled Alicization Beginning. And mind you, I do not know how to pronounce this word. I assume derived from civilization, so I assume it's Alicization, but we'll see what the anime says. Anyway, Alicization Beginning. Let's go into the general data. So the English translation of this book comes in at a page length of 272 pages roughly. It is one of the shorter light novels. It's a very easy read. It's very easy to go through it. It introduces a lot of jargon and terminology, but it's largely really well explained, so you'll be fine. It would take you roughly 4 hours if you are a moderate reader. It took me about 8 hours to finish the light novel because I was taking notes as I was going through. Pretty nice time. You can devote just a small afternoon to it, or maybe 4 afternoons, and you'll pretty much be done with the light novel. Next up, publishing dates. This is going to be very important to note because there are some things that happen in this light novel that seem like they are kind of improving criticisms from the original Sword Art anime, but there's a little bit of a wrinkle with the publication dates for this. So the English translation of this light novel was released in 2016. But the Japanese translation was released on February 12th, 2012. Important to note that the Sword Art Online anime began in July 2012. And like I said, this is important to note because it looks like there are some improvements in this light novel, or some answering to criticisms that people might have had based on the anime production. But because of the timing of when Alicization was released and written, we can honestly say that the criticism of anime fans have not made it into this book. The extra little wrinkle here is that the web novel, which is like a draft for the official light novel version, that was made in 2005. So the ultimate conclusion is that if Alicization was listening to complaints or criticisms that the fans had, the fans that were being listened to at the time of this creation were the fans of the pre-existing web novel or light novel, depending on the timing. So that's just a little thing to keep in mind there. Anyway, so now we're going to go into the general chapter overview just to give you guys an idea of the structure of the novel. Okay, so Prologue 1 is by far the most disorienting part of the book because you have no idea why things are happening. This first bit of the book takes place in what is largely a fantasy world. At least it looks like a fantasy world. There are little hints throughout this part that clue you into this being a virtual reality simulation. There is a Kirito who is not Kirito pretty much, a Kirito that grew up in the world. And truthfully, the Kirito in the first part of the book is actually, I really like him a lot more. And that's largely because normal Kirito is a bit of a smartass, and you kind of see it later on in the book. But there's something just nicer and more genuine about the Kirito that doesn't know he's Kirito compared to the Kirito that pops up later. Prologue 2 is the part that gives us context to what happened in Prologue 1. Very interesting little way of kind of telling a story. I really enjoyed it. Prologue 2 is the one that connects us back to the past events of Sword Art Online. It connects us back to Gun-Gale, connects us back to Shion, connects us back to Asuna, or has Kirito talking with his old friends. It's the one that connects that, hey, this is still Sword Art Online. The big thing that Prologue 2 introduces to the rest of the book that is of absolute importance is the fact that in this world there is a technology that can interact and even potentially manipulate, based on the speculation of the characters, the very essence of the mind, or in other words, the soul of a person. It's confirmed that it can at the very least feed information into the soul, but the ramifications and from the speculations of the characters in Prologue 2, it's very likely that it can manipulate and interact with the soul on a greater level, which opens up the general idea and the general conversation of what is the soul and how does it work when something else is given a soul. Interlude 1 is where we bridge the gap between the Kirito, or the perfect Kirito in the perfect world, versus Kirito the smartass. Interlude part 1 tells us how the Kirito that we know ends up in the new virtual environment that was featured in Prologue part 1. And then finally, chapter 1 is where the majority of the action happens. Chapter 1 is the one that features a lot of Kirito thinking about what to do and how to move forward. And we also get to see a lot of the second main character doing stuff in this part. Ultimately, chapter 1 is a chapter of exploration and discovery, establishment of the long-term goals, establishment of what needs to be done and how it can be done, and it also features a self-contained call to action in the form of a damsel in distress plotline, just to get the kids moving and doing some stuff and having some confrontations. In some ways, you can kind of see it as a coming of age story, or a mini one, because it's ultimately a chapter where Kirito and his friend, the second main character, get to leave their small village and embark into the bigger world. Now to the quick overview of the themes. There's the three main ones that kind of run throughout the novel. Contemplation on the nature of reality, i.e. what makes something real. Contemplation on the deeper meaning of experiences, and this expresses itself mostly in people like Kirito and Asuna pondering that there had to be some bigger purpose or some bigger goal when it came to considering the horrors that unfolded in Aincrad, and there had to be a bigger meaning to the development of virtual reality games. Then you have the contemplation on the nature of the soul and the mind. This one particularly powers how Kirito views the denizens of the virtual world he finds himself trapped in. Now, these three themes are at their best when they come together in the virtual world and make for a really interesting time where you're wondering how real and valid is the experience that Kirito has unfolding in front of him in the virtual landscape. During these moments, the book goes to great lengths to reinforce to the reader and Kirito that the landscapes he is seeing looks as real life, and that the people he is meeting are as nuanced as real people and not just programs. The contemplation of the nature of the soul helps a lot during these moments, because the reader could be left wondering, well, if they are using a copy of another person's soul, then isn't that still a soul even if it is a copy? Or if the information is being fed directly to a person's soul, doesn't that make it real? I mean, information in the form of light comes into your eyes, which your brain then interprets into a perception. What makes that created perception more real than the info being beamed into your very essence? And there's really cool moments where Kirito actually wonders, wait, this feels real. Was my life as Kazuto fake, or is this life the fake one? It's very interesting when you have that little bit of a conflict within Kirito. Well, you're ultimately wondering if the soul is legitimately experiencing those things. What makes that experience any less valid than what your body is experiencing? With these three central ideas, the book tries really hard to sell you on the idea that the experiences in this virtual world are meaningful. And it has to, because the book lives or dies by whether or not the reader buys into the idea that the inhabitants of the virtual world are real and matter. That's the real big thing. He has to sell that they matter. Now, the expression of the three main themes are at their weakest when characters are discussing the ideas outside of the context of this novel's primary virtual world, because you have moments like Asuna positing that the world made without a human desire would be realer than the one that they live in, which is just absolutely smashed by an experience that Kirito has in the virtual world towards the end of the book, where he comes to a conclusion that a world where you can feel legitimate pain and sadness is more real, and that lack of pain is what made every other world that he had been in less real. And just to clarify, Asuna only has a few lines to explain why she believes her criteria for a realer world, and when you look at these lines, it kind of sounds like she has a problem with human corruption and seems to like the idea of a world blooming into life without the help of a guiding human hand. Similarly, the wondering about meaning is at its weakest when you have the characters trying to assign meaning to their being murderers in the virtual reality MMOs. To quote Kirito, "I often believe that everything had meaning, because if not, then what was the reason for all the lives that vanished in SAO?" It's just too easy to be cynical about these lines of thoughts, because it's just, well, Kirito, but there's bad people in the world. That's just how it goes down. And what ultimately happens is that The early conversations, especially the ones that occur in Prologue 2, just seem so shallow because when you have Kirito confronting these questions in the virtual world, he is doing so under a lot of stress and pain. It's like the difference between someone complaining about how hard their life is because coffee is too expensive versus someone living in rural Cuba where water comes out of the tap yellow. Asuna's interaction with the three main themes just seems frivolous compared to Kirito's interactions with them. Okay, so now let's go into mechanics and cool stuff. First off, there's two important characters, Alice and Yu-Gi-Oh, and I apologize for not being able to pronounce that right. I don't know how it's pronounced until we see the anime. Alice ultimately ends up being the long-term call to action, being the reason that Yu-Gi-Oh and to an extent Kirito leave town. Alice gets sidelined after Prologue 1 though, so we can't really chat about her in this one. Yu-Gi-Oh is effectively the second main character. Now I really love what the author did here because Yu-Gi-Oh very effectively shares the spotlight with Kirito. It's really nice to see a character that can do something that Kirito can't. Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh's relationship is expressed well through the sword that they co-own. Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh have access to a legendary sword, but instead of Kirito just having it, they both take turns with it by the end of the novel, and it just helps with the feeling of saying that these two are more or less in an equal partnership. Ultimately, Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito definitely have a dynamic of a teacher and a student at times, but the story treats Yu-Gi-Oh with a lot of respect. He definitely earned his place on the volume cover. Without him, Kirito would probably have crumbled. Now let's talk about the company that Kirito thinks is responsible for the virtual world, Wrath. Wrath is interesting because they are playing on a connection to Alice in Wonderland. You see that connection in their naming the virtual landscape the Underworld, the character of Alice, and their company name. You also have the subtitle Alicization. I mean, you guys can see kind of a connection here, right? Another interesting thing was Kirito feeling pain. Because here you have a setting where a machine is feeding data directly into a soul, you have the opportunity to see Kirito interact with sensations that he maybe hadn't experienced, such as the pain of a sword tearing into his shoulder. It was a pretty cool moment. It was a stark contrast to that time that Kirito was just getting slashed but took no damage because he regained HP too fast. The kid experienced terrible pain for the first time, and it was fun to see him crumple, and it was also great to see how he picked himself up after having Yu-Gi-Oh rush into danger to protect him. The pain gave Kirito adversity, and it was a great obstacle for him to overcome. In terms of a bit of writing that I just wasn't a fan of, it was especially prevalent in Prologue 2, where you had characters going on long-winded explanations to just have everything summed up in a simple phrase. It was fine when you had to introduce jargon, but sometimes it was just too long. For instance, they could be explaining how Kirito interpreted the experience in the virtual world, the limitations and all that, and you as a reader could think, oh, that sounds just like a dream. And sure enough, you have the character summarizing it as that 2 pages later. I just found it to be silly. It's too much over-explanation for a concept that could be explained with, it's like a dream. It felt like the author was trying to be too clever. The pro to that though was that he thoroughly fleshed out the mechanic and the science, so to say, of the world that he was trying to create. But that was about it for fun mechanics. One note though is that I'm giving very simplified explanations here. I do plan on making a few more videos just kind of diving in deeper into the arguments presented in the book and just some of the logic presented in the book. Time permitting, of course. Okay, and now the rant about Kirito. And man, I'm ad-libbing this one. Hopefully it won't make the video too long, but yo man, at the beginning I said that I really liked Prologue 1 Kirito because it was Kirito without the Kirito memories, and the rest of the novel just reminded me just how insufferable Kirito as a character can sometimes be. And he's really annoying, and I'm not gonna lie, I kind of bought into the idea of just making fun of Kirito. But really, there's no reason to make fun of him. The guy's competent, right? He's just too competent. So just to like start on why I think Kirito's a smartass, it's because he says things like these, and I'm gonna quote him. Let's see. Chances that this is somewhere in the real world, 3%. Chances that this is an existing type of VR world, 7%. Chances that this is a voluntary STL drive, 20%. Chances that there was a spontaneous accident during the dive, 69.9999%. Which means there's a 0.0001 chance I got summoned to a real alternate world, I added mentally. Racking my brain for an answer wasn't going to get me much further. Okay, the thing here is that 0.001 is just, it's really just, it's funny, but I think he's serious. What that 0.0001 thing says is that he ran through 10,000 different scenarios. That's what he's saying when he says that. In 10,000 scenarios, there is one possibility where he actually could have ended up in another world. And look, I get it. You could say that, hey, he was just joking. But it's like, guy, he was the only one there at that point in the story. There was no one else around. He had no one to impress. The kid legitimately sat down and thought like that. And from the way that the story is written, and from the fact that we've seen what Kirito can do, for instance, we've seen in the past that Kirito can just hack into Sword Art Online and make Yui, or was that her name? His daughter Yui. The man is legitimately elevated as a higher level of existence throughout the story. So when the author writes this kind of line, I will totally believe that Kirito actually went in there and thought of 10,000 different scenarios. Another similar moment that we just had a moment of Kirito smart assery is pretty much towards the end of the novel. One interesting thing that happened in the novel was that they had to like just throw in a nice little cute kiss moment. Like, you know, you saw the image. Just had to throw that in there. And the justification for that, because it's so hard to justify why he would do that otherwise, the justification for that was hilarious. And I quote, "I had just carried out something that the real me would never do, thus proving that I was the real me. If I were a replica Flucklight," in other words, the Flucklight is just what the Flucklight, it kind of sounds dirty. No, that's the word that they're using to describe just primary particle that they're interacting with that they assume is the soul. That's just what they're calling it, Flucklight. Anyway, if I were a replica Flucklight, my body would have stopped automatically a few inches from Selka's forehead. Alright, overall, you know, what he's trying to say in that line was that when he went to kiss this girl's forehead, it was a test to make sure that he was the real thing. And Kirito, he says like, yeah, I'm the real thing. He pats himself on the back. Now, obviously, I'm not gonna lie, I do think it's more or less the real thing here, but this is just stupid. Why? Because the thing that just seems stupid about this line and just what's going on in that last moment in the novel is that by this point in the novel, Kirito has thoroughly seen the people around him. He's thoroughly seen that these are not just regular programs, that they are legitimately reacting to everything he does. They are legitimately conversing with him, interacting with him. He can see that. He's already at a point where he's questioning whether or not the people who made this game were playing God, because they had been already manipulating something that was identified as the essence of the mind. It seems ridiculous to me that he gets to that point where he acknowledges that the essence of the mind is being tampered with, that he does not even tolerate the possibility that he could be a replica that had a moment of self-awareness, thought to itself, am I a replica? Thought about what he himself as a replica would not do, and then went and did it. There's nothing saying a replica can't have a moment of self-awareness if you're already at the point where you're talking about manipulating a mind or copying a mind. If you copy a mind, the logic would be that the mind is capable of doing anything. It's not as if just making the copy somehow stops the mind from being self-aware of itself. Right? It's just, it seems like a really bad thought pattern, and it seems like a thought pattern that could be proven wrong in a later volume, and it's just funny. But this is just a moment of, you know, Kirito patting himself on the back. I just thought it was stupid. It was probably the stupidest thing that, well, at least, I gotta be careful. It was the stupidest thing that I think, from my perspective, he came to throughout all of this. Especially just when he spent the entire novel kind of trying to rationalize what the people in front of him are and whether or not this experience was real. So just, it's odd. It's odd. It's a really just self-congratulating move on his part. But that's really the biggest rant I have for it. Like, otherwise, Kirito's just Kirito, whatever. I like Kirito without the Kirito memories, but it doesn't matter. The thing is, regardless of what, Kirito is still a competent protagonist because he has so many accolades. He's gonna be super competent, and at the very least, he gets the plot going. And even if the author doesn't want to make Kirito flawed character, Yu-Gi-Oh is a very flawed character, so it's cool to have Yu-Gi-Oh there to balance out Kirito, and Yu-Gi-Oh is there to also support Kirito when he actually had a moment of weakness. So overall, my final thoughts for this novel, my rating, I'm going to try and think of a better rating and then get it kind of solidified for future videos. But my rating for this novel, ultimately, I'm not going to give it a number score, because number scores, I don't really have strong, I haven't developed the system yet, but I would give it a rating of definitely would buy the next novel in the series. Usually I do have novels where I just don't want to read anymore because it's just dumb at that point. But not for Sword Art. This is one that I would definitely buy the next novel for. However, I would not buy a physical copy. For this one, I would just stick with the digital. You know, it just, I don't love Sword Art enough to the point that I feel like I need to have a physical copy of the novel. I'm okay just having it on my little tablet and reading it from a tablet through the Amazon service. Pretty good stuff on that part. My final thoughts about the novel. You know, it's a cool new jump. The afterword talked about how the author kind of just wanted to try and expand his world. He wanted to do something new, and I think he kind of really accomplished that. What with this world that is the most real, most real virtual reality landscape that Kirito's ever been in. It's also got that extra pain factor. So I'm very interested to see how Kirito deals with the idea of being slashed at more often in the future and having to deal with the actual physical pain from that. I'm very interested in that. I love the way that he implemented NPCs interacting with video game logic. Some other stories are way more in your face about it, or are way more direct about it. But here you have the people coming up with their own terminology and their own rationalizations, calling it something similar to the work of a god, or calling it sacred arts when they're opening up a status window. I really love that. I thought that was a really cool little bit. And finally, my final thought is, when I'm reading this book, it really does feel like the author kind of just wanted to make a protagonist legitimately going into another world type story, and that first prologue 1 bit really does feel like that. So it's interesting how the author still stuck to his virtual world, but he upped the ante and made it pretty much a fantasy world. I think, like I said, one of the big challenges is selling this to the readers that these people matter. And you could have very easily have done that if you just flat out plucked Kirito and tossed him into a fantasy world. But, putting it in the virtual context makes it a lot more challenging. Like I said, my rating overall is I would buy the next book in the series, but I would not buy a physical copy. That's just a personal thing. If you're a fan of Sword Art and you're a fan of reading, I do recommend it. Now, when it comes to anime adaptation, because it is such a short novel, I'm really not sure how many episodes it'll take up. Usually, light novel adaptations, a volume takes up maybe 3 or 4 episodes, but even in those cases, there's still a lot of material being dropped. For this one, I could see 4 episodes, but I'm concerned because the promotional video pretty much covers the events of this chapter, or sorry, the events of this volume in just that one promotional video. So I'm interested to see how exactly they're gonna split this up. It's gonna be very interesting. But overall, yeah, that's the light novel. Guys, let me know what you thought down below. And my favorite moment for this light novel, there was a creepy moment where Asuna was talking about how she felt being able to see Kirito's heartbeat. I'm gonna leave that out of context, but let's just say she was, even other characters pointed out it was a creepy thought. Anyway, guys, because this is the first video in the series, let me know if you enjoyed it, if this format was good enough. And I don't really watch other possible book reviewers, but if you guys want to give me tips and you want to recommend me someone else who does a good job that you think I could learn from, let me know down below. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Till next time, hope you have a great day. And yeah.